Okay. Some dentists, question number two, some dentists have set up an alternative work week so they don't have to pay overtime. Is that right?
That's true. This is a California law. The difference in overtime payments between California, Nevada, Alaska, is that those 3 states have the 8-hour day rule. What that means is that if you work an 8-hour day, particularly in California, I'll speak about that, then any time that you work after 8 hours is overtime. In all the other states, they very sensibly have a 40-hour work week, and a few states even have longer ones, but just for the sake of discussion. So it gives the dentists in those states the flexibility to have any kind of schedule that works for them and for their patients without having the specter of overtime. But in good old California, we passed the Workplace Flexibility Act, which makes it absolutely inflexible, I might add. And that law allows for dentists to create an alternative work week schedule. So they can have a day that is 8.5, 9.5 hours long, and they don't pay overtime as long as the total number of hours is under 40. The problem with the law, typical of us, is it's so complicated. And you have to fulfill each of the elements of the law, the rules, and if you miss one, it's invalidated. So there are a number of my clients who think they've done everything they need to do to set up an alternative work week, but they've forgotten 1 or 2 steps. The most important step is to send your new alternative work week schedule to the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. Yeah, if you don't send that letter, I don't know what they do with all those letters. But if you don't send that letter, and if you're not published on their website as having a bona fide alternative work week, you're in danger of owing 3 to 4 years of back overtime.
Oh.
So it's very complicated. It's a pain in the neck. But if it's run correctly, you can save money on overtime. What I'd like to offer the California dentists that are part of the university.
And I have to say something. California dentists need all the help they can get right now.
That's right.
Because the state's going bankrupt, and as you can tell, there are several fees and penalties if anybody screws up.
That's
so
right.
California dentists really need all the help they can get.
That is
so
true.
how are you going to help us out?
I have all of the rules written. I can send a dentist the rules, all the steps, the sample. You have to have a secret ballot.
A secret ballot?
I have the secret ballot paperwork, the sample letter. And if you're in trouble, and if you think you've had an alternative work week all this time and you really haven't, I can help. So that takes a phone call, however. So I'm happy to send that. And on this subject, let me just say a few things about overtime.
Okay.
Wage and hour lawsuits, particularly in California, they're the number one lawsuit. The topic du jour, as it were. But even in other states, there's a couple of tips that I want to pass along. If you have your staff keeping time on your computers through Dentrix or one of your other software, make sure that you print the time cards and look at the edits. Because we just handled a case recently where the office manager, who was the only one who had access to the time records.
I remember this case.
Yes. When the doctor finally printed all of the time records, about 200 time records in the last year were edited, and she was able to embezzle a lot of money, steal time, in other words, put down time she did not work, because she edited the timesheets and the doctor never looked. He trusted her. She'd been there 22 years, and he assumed she was trustworthy. So once he kind of was on to that, when he looked, there was a lot, $100,000 worth of improprieties.
And what people don't realize that embezzlement is not just stealing money per se. Time. They steal time as an embezzlement, as embezzling.
That's right.
And that happens routinely in many practices because they just don't take the time to check the numbers.
Yes. As Bryant Truitt often says, trust but verify. The other thing I want to remind people is that if you don't have your hygienist clocking out for lunch, you can get stuck particularly with the 8-hour rule, but even paying them for time that they don't work. The best way to keep track of hygienists, even though the industry has always had a per diem rate, is an hourly rate. so that if they're not working, if patients don't show up or whatever, you don't have to pay. And they have to clock out for lunch. So that's another thing that in California particularly, if an employee gets mad and goes to a lawyer, the lawyer gets out his checklist and says, let's see, how about breaks? Did you get breaks? No? Okay, check. We'll sue for that. How about lunches? Did you take your lunch? No. Okay, well, let's sue for that. So the employee may have come in for a completely different topic, and by the time the lawyer gets done with him or her, now it's a long-standing list of infractions.
And remember, it's the attorneys that make these laws and our state legislators,
Right.
so that it works to their benefit to make sure it all works for them.
Exactly.
Okay.